Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So please welcome Nick, and welcome me. So thanks everyone for joining us. So we have this fabulous announcement, the second one this summer. So we started June with biggest milestone in our project, game demo launch. So thanks Nick and the team for that. And now it's a second milestone. So we're bringing in our first in-game NFTs, for sale, basically, and they will be as well live in the game. So we prepared some brief presentation for you guys. Nick, anything to add at this stage?
I'll have a lot more to add once I can actually show people the vehicles driving around on the surface of Mars.
Yeah, good. So guys, if you have any questions, we see your chat going live. We are streaming to multiple sources this time. Mars is getting clever and covers a lot more channels. So okay, so let's start. So here we gather to announce landowners exclusive landowners sale event for vehicle in-game NFTs, and we have exclusive discount for you. So all landowners will be able to purchase vehicles with a 35% discount, and this event will last for a limited time until we then make vehicle NFTs public for the community. For the public, and vehicle sale will start in 24 hours from today. So we just wanted to give you a heads up. Get ready, prepare your wallets, and maybe add additional networks to your MetaMask. So one big thing, we have a new partnership, and it's pretty big partnership. So Mars 4 is partnering with Polygon Studios, and that's where we mint our vehicle NFT collection. So this will result in lower gas fees, and I believe this partnership again will give us extra edge and extra reach as well. So welcome. Yeah, you see, please meet Caripen GPRV, ground penetrating radar vehicle. So this is the key element for you to explore the Mars, or in other words, you need the rover to take the Mars over. So this vehicle is meant for exploring and unlocking the potential of your land and of your Mars land NFT, and this vehicle will help to travel around and bring those and find those hidden treasures underneath your land plot. Yep, go on.
Let's not underestimate how big of a value being able to traverse the Martian land quickly is, because as I'm sure everyone playing the game has realized already, two main things. First of all, even in this demo, the land is still massive and it takes a while to traverse, and especially traversing it on foot, carrying all of your resources with you, making many trips, that is quite time consuming and energy consuming. So the introduction of the vehicle to gameplay really does completely change the way the players get to interact with the Martian environment. And that's before we even start discussing the unique features of this vehicle, as you see in its name, GPRV, a ground penetrating radar vehicle, the ability to scan for resources and stuff while moving quickly through your environment. Before even touching on that, just the ability to be moving so much faster and more efficiently through the Martian landscape is just completely changing to the completely what word I want to say. It completely shifts the gameplay experience. Distance becomes a new concept.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. So here we wanted to show you some bigger pictures and put more focus on each vehicle type. So you can see the legendary, the epic, the classic ones. I believe later in the process we'll be able to show you as well some in-game footage how these vehicles are driving. And and there is an estimate actually when you guys will be able to drive those vehicles in game as well. So we can discuss about those items as well. Nick,
yeah, let's start off discussing a bit of the development of the vehicles. So one thing that's really interesting when it comes to developing vehicles for Mars is, because I've mentioned this on other gameplay streams and AMAs before, is that because there's only a third gravity, it means the concept of strength to weight ratios of materials is almost alien to us. Like, if you imagine on Earth, we think of steel as being strong but quite heavy. So if you build a structure too big, the weight of the structure itself will overload the reinforcements you use to build the structure. Whereas on Mars, it's it's a totally different paradigm. I mean, a good example is, I'm sure you've heard sayings like a spider's web is stronger than steel. And that's just referring to the strength to weight ratio of the same weight of steel in a spider's web. But when you're working in an environment like Mars, where you have 1/3 gravity, that also means in many applications, not all of them, that effectively materials are 3 times stronger because they don't have to support nearly as much of their own weight. This doesn't apply to everything, though, because they're not 3 times less massive. They're just 3 times less heavy. So stuff like braking, accelerating, those kinds of things that still take the same amount of pressures, because that's about mass and acceleration, which stays constant. However, the weight that needs to be supported by the wheels and suspension system and the structures, that is way lighter, which leads to the design direction we went with our vehicles, which is they are way bigger. Because if you think on Earth, like, a big reason why it's very difficult to build massive machines is that they're so heavy, the ground itself cannot support them. I mean, if you look at really large tractors and backhoes and like construction digging machines, you'll notice the base footprint of the machine, like almost 50% of the footprint is just designed in massive, super wide tracks so that the vehicle itself doesn't sink into the ground. Because once you're dealing with weights of that amount, even solid environments can appear almost like liquid or quicksand. So because of that, we got to build a lot bigger, and we got to look at making vehicles a lot more of almost like a building, a self-sustaining structure. So you would have pressure inside, you would have life support inside, you would have inventory space and storage space and ability to transport people, and just a lot more functionality than we would typically see in vehicles on Earth. Like, it's more looking at larger scale, say, military transport vehicles and stuff. Or a great example would be like the Mercedes-Benz Unimog, which is like a vehicle that can transport people, that can transport equipment. It has like water, fuel. Like, you can take 10 people, stick them in that, and they'll cross a desert, and they will have everything they need to survive crossing the desert 2 or 3 times, probably. So going much more in that design direction. And that's what we see with this first vehicle.
But Nick, there's also a challenge. Like you're making structures more massive, but then you are lengthening the shoulder, of suspension structures, and then again the amplitude of moving is completely different from what we have then on Earth. So how do you and your design team goes about those things? Because we talked a lot, that you're primarily designing a working design, like it has to work in real life. Yeah. So how do you go about those challenges? Extending the.
So we're really grateful that in the modern technology era, it's so easy to access uh, decent material simulations. Flawless material simulations, that stuff that NASA and Formula One and automakers are using. But generally, good material simulations are quite anyone can get them just on CAD or even free CAD-like softwares. Uh, so what we do is we first set as if we were designing a real vehicle. We have a design brief of what the vehicle needs to do. For example, the Terrapin is designed to transport this very heavy radar structure, designed to be very agile off-road, because the idea is that you'll be exploring areas you haven't explored yet. So you need very long suspension travel, large wheelbases, and the ability to climb over a lot of structures and rock formations and stuff like that, while at the same time balancing a decent speed. Because as an exploration vehicle, you want to be able to move fairly quickly, because if you get into a situation you don't want to be in, you want to be able to get out of it quite quickly as well. Um, so with that, we looked at what would be the requirements for the suspension system. The first thing that you'll notice is huge wheels, because although there is a third gravity, the vehicle is still quite massive and is still quite heavy. Well, massive actually is the correct word. So we want to spread out the wheelbase as much as possible. We're also looking at using semi-rigid tires, which is something that NASA right now is looking into, using metal weaves instead of like pressurized air tires, and mixing that concept with the low inflation tires that the US military tested in Antarctica, which is basically if you take a really big tire and pretty much deflate it almost completely, the contact patch of the tire is massive, which means that you can drive over stuff that normal wheels would get stuck in. You can also climb up extremely steep gradients. You can climb right over rocks and all sorts of things like that. Because if you imagine a large gap in the ground, if you have a super deflated tire, then as it rolls over, your excess rubber or surface material will fill that gap and maintain traction at all times. So this is very unlike modern car tires, which are very rigid. And the downside of this is less fuel efficiency, because it costs more energy because you're constantly deforming the tire. However, with metal lattice structures to use the wheels, they can still maintain quite a good lifespan. The reason why the US military tossed out the concept originally in the 50s or 60s is because if you use a rubber tire, it deforms so much that the tires just break down really quickly. So like it's not worth it. But with new using like advanced spring steel alloys, they can return to their natural shape so easily that it becomes viable. So the first step was that really big wheels using soft compliant tires. The next element is we needed stages of suspension dampening. This is actually a great image we looked at here. The actually, let's go back a couple of images to no forwards. Yeah, that one. Stop. That image right here. So notice there's two tiers, if you will, of suspension. Actually, there's three. In normal cars, we have two tiers of suspension. The first one is the wheel itself, because the air in the wheel provides some cushioning. And here we have the same thing. The tire itself, as a compliant tire, provides a level of suspension. The next level of suspension is also built into the steering system. Notice the attachment from the wheel onto this arm is done with four hydraulic posts and then the drive axle. And those four posts can not only be used to turn the wheel left and right, but can also act as a active suspension dampening for the wheel going up and down. So instead of a spring, it's using sensors and hydraulics to actively dampen any bumps needed, or even to raise and lower the wheel where necessary. But this is at a very fine level of adjustment. And then for larger adjustments, you have the entire arm itself, whereas in the top left of the arm, you see that radial coupling, which connects to the vehicle. And then underneath that, you see a much larger hydraulic piston, and that raises and lowers the entire arm, which is for far larger suspension adjustment. So for example, if like you drive off a cliff, that the impact force from that will be far too great to absorb from the wheel mounting alone. So a majority of that would be absorbed by the whole arm. However, if you're driving across mostly flat land and you go over small bumps, that's the kind of thing that would be absorbed by the tire and the wheel coupling itself. And we can see this a bit when we get in game. Why don't you show a bit of the driving footage from in game?
Yeah, sure. Going for this?
Yes, I sent you two videos. You have another video that's in like a test environment.
Yeah. So that's all the production.
Let's put that one, because that's a bit easier to examine what I'm showing right now. So this is the vehicle in the suspension test environment. You can see we're also flipping through the different rarity skins. But if you'll notice, as we go over obstacles, for the smaller changes, the wheel itself raises and lowers a bit. But as the amount of raising and lowering increases past a point, that's when the whole arm itself will begin raising and lowering. So, and this is meant as like a very extreme example of testing. And here's where I drove off the side of the cliff. So yeah, my bad. I'm not a great driver, and you see some elements of that physics simulation are a bit weird, and we're still working on that because, as I said, mass and 1/3 gravity is not something that we experience a lot in games. So finding the right balance between fun and realistic gravity takes a lot of tweaking. For example, one thing we noticed in the very beginning, when we first put the vehicle using realistic mass calculations, realistic torque and thrust calculations, and realistic gravity calculations, is that if you get to full speed and you hit a bump, you just go flying through the air, and like there isn't enough gravity to bring you back down to the surface to easily control the vehicle. So because of that, like we're probably looking at going closer to like half Earth gravity, just to make sure the vehicles are still controllable and enjoyable to drive. And so here you'll see a bit of how the suspension arm itself absorbs larger movements, and the wheel itself, and the wheels absorb smaller movements. And this is, I think, for anyone wondering, this is the legendary Caripen skin, which I'm quite a fan of.
I'm just mesmerized, by all these in-game footages, and yeah, as I mentioned to you, Nick, I use this to calm my son down when he's kind of hyped and is like, "Daddy, show me something interesting." It just just throw Caripen GPRV, video, and he's calm. He's in there,
It is super mesmerizing.
Yeah, it is. Talking about the design, so we see this little dome at the back of Caripen. So we see in the blueprints, this is the place where the actual radar is being put.
Yep.
Yeah, how does it work? Because again, ground penetrating.
So the way it works is, the dome protrudes out the top and out the bottom. And what it is, the bottom part of the dome uses radar waves to detect differences in material density on the ground and environment below it. And then it will look at those densities and compare it against known minerals and what it would expect to find. And it will give you a heads-up display where you're more likely to find, for example, an iron deposit or maybe uranium inside some specific rocks, stuff like that. Obviously, there is a bit of mix of sci-fi and fantasy here. Well, I guess sci-fi, science, and fiction in how we design this, because we want something that is realistically based, but also something that is quite useful and fun to use. And one thing that we see that we plan to have as quite a big part of the game is rewarding exploration. And the best way to reward exploration is to hide stuff throughout the map and let people explore and find and have them have a monetary value to doing so. So the idea here is that for in like a player story example, maybe a Caripen driver could be renting his services to landowners to explore their lands and tell them and give them a map saying, look, in these areas you have some of these resources, in these areas you have some of these other resources. Here is some super high value uranium and stuff like that that you may find. And then you basically making the reward for exploration being the commodity of information that they can then sell and trade and do as they please with. Because as players will notice right now in the game, you're not sure what resources are where until you actually mine them and get the resources and get the raw ores. At that point, you know what there was, but that means that without knowing ahead of time, you may waste a lot of time because, well, you have to mine it to know what it is.
It's actually one related question with this. With the radar on our vehicle, we'll be able to map our entire land and have it documented forever where certain ore or certain resources are located.
That's yes and no, because the objective is that we will repopulate and move around some resources on lands, not move around, but we'll repopulate them. So if you have some resources in a certain area of your land, once you mine those out, we will respawn some of them in other areas of your land. So there's always more to explore. There's always there's always more to explore. So a map of the land would eventually go completely out of date.
Right. It's
And
normal.
yeah. So
Technology.
they're well, exactly. And the how exactly the information is stored, we haven't yet decided. But in general, this is the kind of thing where I would rather not give an automated tool for. Like, there's kind of two ways we could do this. Like, one way, for example, is like uncovering the fog of war in an RTS game, which means like you just need to send a person to basically just go in a zigzag pattern across the whole land, and then you know everything. You discover the whole thing; it's all done, and then you have like some file that you can just send to people, and that's all the information. And I'm against that idea in principle because it makes exploration not about exploring the land. It makes it more just about uh, finding the most efficient zigzag pattern across the land. It's kind of boring. Whereas what I would rather do is have the information be fleeting. So as you're moving around, you're getting these heads up display warnings for things being detected, and it's up to the explorer to parse that information, figure out what is of value, what is not, and then give them some simple tool to note that information down. For example, the ability to draw on the map. So as you're driving around, you could have the land map that's in the game right now just open maybe to the side of your screen. And as you're driving around, you see where you are. If you see a notice like potential uranium deposit, you just mark that location on the map as a potential uranium deposit. Maybe come back and scan it with far less efficient, far slower, but more precise instruments at a later point in time. This also makes the experience of exploring and gathering that information a skill of some sorts about recognizing patterns in the land, recognizing what you're looking for. Because, for example, if let's say you head out to look for uranium, you may be ignoring iron deposits, and then a week down the line, you may be like, "Oh, we need some iron deposits," and someone who approach the exploration passionately may still remember those moments, like where they spotted stuff, or someone who was very diligent with their note taking, etc. And so it makes it more of a engaging process. There's more room for failure, which means there's more room for success.
So I can smell some sort of specialisms here. So the way you describe, some people can be like really develop a specialism in exploring resources and be, as you said, like very meticulous and precise about that. So they can make for living out of that. Same probably applies for the next sort of profession or specialism. I would say the mining. As you mentioned, again, you may need additional sort of more accurate equipment to get to certain places. So, guys, just keep on listening, because I believe Nick throws some really interesting hints on what can be and what will be done. And Nick, shall we go back to the blueprints, blueprints, and explain for the crowds further about vehicles? So we talked about suspension part. We briefly mentioned the GPR.
I think one final note on the suspension. You'll notice this vehicle has two different suspension systems. And that's because if you look at the design of the vehicle, obviously a lot of the weight in that radar dome is concentrated at the rear of the vehicle. So the front two wheels are suspended via an arm, which gives a lot more range of travel, easier for climbing up and down curves, whereas the rear suspension has a bit less travel. However, it's able to support a lot more mass, which is why it's designed as such, and also why you have two wheels in a conjoined suspension cradle. I'm not sure what the right word would be.
Cradle. Yeah.
I guess. And that's designed with a different suspension system to the front. Because, as we said, we kind of approach this as if we were designing a real vehicle that had to work. And what we found is that you can't just, if you use the same style of suspension in the rear to the front, then you just wouldn't have enough travel at the front of the vehicle to be able to climb up and down rocks, hills, and stuff like that. And if we mirrored the front suspension in the rear, it would be too off balance. You wouldn't be able, like, it would be constantly stressed supporting the mass. And if you moved the suspension arms pivot points further back, then the center of, not gravity, center of
weight, balance.
Yes. The center of balance is center of gravity. There's center of gravity, and then there's like center of torque, rotational motion. Like if you apply a force at either end, the point where it'll actually rotate around in a vacuum, that becomes too far forwards, and it makes the vehicle quite unstable, especially at higher speeds and stuff like that. So that's how we ended up coming to this suspension arrangement.
Okay. So active suspension, yeah.
So now, getting into some of the other elements of the vehicles, this vehicle can only support a single occupant, just the driver, as the rest of that, the vehicle's hull is taken up by the radar dome and, most importantly, cooling systems for the radar dome itself. Because people know Mars is cold, but one thing that a lot of people don't take into consideration is that because there's so much less air pressure, it means it's actually a lot harder to cool things down, because we don't have convection cooling is just 90% less effective there, because there is 90% less air moving over the surfaces. So the same problem you have in space of like the the International Space Station or satellites and stuff, the only way they can radiate heat is through, the only way they can get rid of heat is through radiation, which is fairly slow process. On Mars, we can still use convection, like surface area, blowing air past a cooling fin grid or something like that. But because the air is so much less dense, it's not nearly as effective. So cooling of machines that constantly generate heat becomes kind of a big problem, which is why you see here we have cooling panels at the back, and then also air intakes at the front, which intake air, compress it, and then pass it over cooling fins. To once again help maintain a lower cooling temperature.
Right.
And although it is only one occupant, the vehicle does have full life support systems for said occupant. So you don't, in fact, it has very good ones. As an exploration vehicle, it's designed to be able to go into very cold environments, high radiation environments, and so forth. So the shielding, heating systems, oxygen reservoirs are very well. The first two are very well developed. The second one is very large, or the third one is very large, so that you can be taking this on extended expeditions across the Martian surface and not need to worry about dying as much as you would in another vehicle.
Nick, there's actually a related question from the community. So, of course, everyone expects, that they can explore the remote areas. As you said, that's a vehicle fit for one purpose, one person with full supply systems. But how much of additional stuff the guys will be able to take on those exploration journeys?
So this vehicle, as I mentioned before, it gives up a lot of its hull space to the sensor array and life support systems and fuel energy reservoirs to be able to achieve all of its goals as a scout. So although it does have some inventory capacity, it's quite minimal. So it wouldn't be very useful as a transportation vehicle of massive amounts of ore. Now, that said, if you're going out and you're mining something that is in quite rare supply, for example, lithium, which is quite rare, quite high value, this would be probably all that you would need if you're thinking of just a solo player going out exploring and mining for lithium. You'd be far better off using this than, say, a resource transportation vehicle, because the challenges there are in finding it, and once you do, you don't have much quantity of it. So the storage space on this vehicle would be sufficient for that. But something like mining anything in quantity, or mining irons or clays or ice, anything like that, it would be far more useful than doing it on foot, but it's far from optimal. That's where some of our other vehicles that we'll be launching later will be coming in.
Probably, like, if we're going here more technical, do we have an idea sort of the carrying capacity of each vehicle to be defined in liters, cubic meters, cubic centimeters?
It'll be defined mostly in mass. That's how we deal with most of our limitations, is done in mass. Because most objects that are less massive can be compressed. So at the end of the day, the limiting factor often is mass. And that same thing like with the colonist, as everyone has known, like I think the colonist can hold, I believe it's 500 kilograms before becoming completely overburdened and struggling to move and walk. Or 500 kilograms as in kilograms as a unit of mass, not weight, meaning that realistically they're carrying about like 160 kilograms on their back, which is a lot, but we assume the colonists are decently fit and have a bit of exosuits enhancement to help them carry the weight. So in vehicles, that's how the limitations on inventory will be decided. The exact amount that this vehicle can carry hasn't been decided yet. That's something we want to get player feedback on and play testing on. That's like why we're at this stage of development where we're getting features in and working and giving them to the community as fast as possible, because afterwards it's a lot harder to balance these things or change these things once people are actively using them to earn a living. And then you also have problems of biases. It's a lot easier to be unbiased and give real feedback while we're all testing and trying to find the most fun and enjoyable game mechanics now. Whereas in the future, when you're asking someone who made it their job to, for example, be an explorer, then now there is a monetary motivation in the opinions and feedback that they give. So it's kind of it's everyone wants the same thing. We all want the game to be as enjoyable as possible, because if it's fun, more people will play it. If more people are playing it, then everyone has a larger market to sell to. That's how we all succeed, the more people are playing the game. So right now, at this earlier stages of development, it's a lot easier for everyone to give more honest and objective feedback on what is and is not fun.
There is one good comment, actually. The guys on the fun part, the guys are naming the first Caripen Potato 1.
Yes, I saw that, and that is magnificent. That has to be made a meme. That has to be made a meme.
Yeah. I'll use a brief opportunity to answer one question, because I've seen that's been repeated multiple times. So even though we are partnering with Polygon, we don't have a capability to take payments in Matic yet, but that's in the plans as well. And thanks for raising this. We see this as well brings some interest from our community, so that's a good sign. So we are thinking in the same direction, guys. Cool. Nick, shall we jump to the questions? Because we probably did quite detailed introduction. So I tried to group some of them around. The first one coming from community was, is it possible to flip over? And we showed that it is possible.
Yes.
The question following that, is it like, how many colonists I need, to flip the vehicle back? So let's say in real life situation, I just call my friends. If I flip with the car, I just, ask for 4 strong guys, and they can help me, to roll it back. So how about this?
I feel like this doesn't answer the question, but I guess it kind of does. That give me a long enough stick and I'll lift the planet. Like Archimedes' quote, which is true. With enough leverage, any amount of strength can move anything. However, there is a few stages to this answer. The first stage, in the very first version of drivable vehicles that players will have, you can flip it over. It can get stuck, in which case, in true classic video game fashion, you have 2 options. You can ram into it with another vehicle, try and knock it upright again, or you can just respawn the vehicle and it will respawn upright again. Past that, we will be, in future stages of development, we'll be experimenting with different ways to deal with this problem. Originally, I wanted salvaging vehicles to be a responsibility that other vehicles had. I don't have the concept art here on me, but we did concept a salvage vehicle that had a crane and a big flat back on it. And then I started debating that, going back and forth, because the reality is it's very easy to just make a mistake and flip a vehicle if you're having too much fun driving it around. And making that too punishing, that's not good game design. Like punishing someone because they were just having too much fun driving a bit recklessly it will result in everyone driving like a Grand Theft Auto NPC. And that's just really boring. Like, that's not fun. That's not why we built these vehicles. So how exactly we'll deal with flipping a vehicle upright in the future versions of the game is something we're looking for community feedback on. And because obviously there needs to be some more realistic solution, some more engaging solution, but we don't want it to be so penalizing as you need to call someone who owns a rescue vehicle and pay whatever ransom they want, or you're screwed. What we'll probably want to try and do is some sort of what would be ideal is, I'm not sure if anyone has seen someone dig a truck out of the mud. It's actually really fun, because like you have this truck that's completely entrenched in the mud. Like you give it as much power as you give it, it's just spinning its wheels. You have to get a shovel, you have to dig out in front and back of the wheels, you try and jam like logs or pieces of wood in there, try and rock the truck back and forth to get it more on top of the wooden supports, and eventually like get it to have enough traction to get out. Or do all sorts of crazy things, like I've seen people take like a chunk of wood, like a piece of firewood, put it on the side of a wheel, and then wrap what's like those what are those like yellow bands with hooks on either side that like you ratchet them and pull it tight to like hold stuff to like truck beds and stuff. I don't know what those straps are called.
Yeah, it's those like lorry straps. Yeah,
Yeah, like and they just tight, yeah. And then they wrap that through the wheel hub around the wood, back through wheel hub around the wood, and it just attaches this block of wood on the side of the wheel like a giant flipper. And then when they like put it in first gear and give it a bit of gas, it like just digs itself out with its own like block of wood they tied to the wheel. So like that would be the ideal if we could give some players some kind of like mini game functionality to make unstucking your vehicle or flipping it upright again kind of an art of creativity. However, that actually achieving that in a game is ridiculously complicated and requires a lot more thinking and simplifying of systems. So how exactly you'll be riding vehicles in the final game is something that I'm sure people who are regularly playing the current version of the game, you'll experience a few different solutions, and we'll be looking for your feedback on what you found the right mix of punishing to make driving well feel rewarding, but not punishing enough that you never want to drive recklessly and have fun.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. That was I think detailed enough for the guys to understand. So
There's
basically,
one great. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
as I hear, so we will introduce some of, as it's a survival game, so we will introduce later some of the tools, additional tools, that you can probably, if you're stuck in sand, you can use a winch. Most probably some sort of winch, maybe, I don't know, jackhammer. Could be one of the options as well. So yeah, we will be looking for your feedback, guys. To if we need and what kind of tools we need to develop. If you keep constantly get stuck. I think.
We had another really interesting question here. Will there be larger vehicles in the Caripen available later, like trucks? Yes, of the 4 vehicles that are completed, 2 of them are significantly larger than the Caripen. One of them is a bit smaller, being the Click Beetle, which I'm sure longtime fans will have already seen the concept art of ages ago. There's 2 vehicles significantly larger than the Caripen. One of them, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this or not.
Of course.
Can we tease it? Okay. There's the Karkanda, which will be coming out after the Caripen, which is a personnel transport. So the Caripen, one of its major weaknesses is only can fit one person, the driver. The Karkanda will be able to fit far more people for larger mining operations and also for just traversing the environment. And with that additional space to fit people, you can also use it to transport resources quite well. And then after that, we have the Shire, which is basically like the sci-fi monster truck version of a semi-truck. And that is purely designed for mass transportation of resources, items, components, other vehicles, even stuff like that. Whereas the Karkanda is very large, kind of good at everything involving moving around, but not a master at any of them. The Shire sacrifices off-road capabilities a bit for mass, super efficient transport of materials.
So are we saying that for some of the vehicles, some of the future vehicles, we might even need to build roads?
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, the construction of roads is a feature that we are working on now. It's an interestingly challenging one because we want to follow a similar system to our current building system, which allows we give the player a few pieces, and they're allowed to do a lot of unique and interesting things with those pieces. So coming up with a way to follow that same philosophy with roads is an interesting design challenge. Over the next couple months, you'll probably see some initial prototypes of that in the game and that people can start giving feedback on.
Okay. There is another group of questions related to this. So people asking about the functions of the vehicle apart from the scouting, like driving and exploring. So definitely we can mention charging function, which will be embedded. So depends on a vehicle type. Yeah, there will be a different charging time. Anything else to highlight from those additional functions?
I think there's also an important thing we should be talking about, how in these early stages before the full Mars 4 play to earn game is fully up and running, we will be allowing players to use their vehicles in the website, in the MCC, to be able to start earning a profit now and start interacting with the lands that they own and so forth. Because as people know, like the full game itself is a massive project. It's going to take us a while to get to that final stage where everything is done and everyone's profiting. Everyone's being able to play and profit and do those things in the full 3D game. So we'll be integrating some functionality into the MCC, the Mars Control Center, where people can use their vehicles to begin unlocking resources on their lands and discovering resources on their lands, and also extracting some of those resources. So that's going to be in a way, I guess we could say that we're approaching the investor and the gamer at the same time through a different system. The gamers will be able to play with the vehicles immediately, drive them around, have fun in the game with them, and while we're still merging the fun and the profit and economy into one single experience, you'll still be able to have both of them.
Okay, I believe that, yeah, that answers quite in depth. So you mentioned that players will be able to drive them straight away in the game. So when is that planned? Of course, we don't need.
I think that's the players will be able to drive the vehicles in game by the end of this month is our current goal. As you can see, like they're already mostly working. There's just like right now we're doing more back end work to make sure that if you purchase and own a vehicle, like it shows up in your inventory in the game and you get to deploy it and those things. More of those kind of technical accounting, if you will. So although I guess in that case it won't be right away, it may be a week or two after the initial sale. But very soon, in a couple of weeks, you'll be able to be driving them around in game.
Yeah, guys, that was one of the discussions we kept having with Nick. Do we sacrifice one part of the development, or for you to bring the capability to drive in the game? Related questions, a round of questions was about the vehicles wearing down, spare parts. So is there some sort of a decay? Do we need to hide them from storms? The guys are saying, straight away worried about the garages. Do they need to build, garages with 5 locks, not to affect that by radiation and so on? So yeah. So how quickly vehicles will wear down, and if these are planned in the mechanics?
Yes, we will be adding in vehicle durability, and vehicles will be able to get damaged by storms, by weather, by crashing and stuff like that. However, in the very first version, we won't have that. As the philosophy that all of the long-term followers of the project know, the first step is to get the mechanics in-game into the player's hand as quickly as possible, get people playing, and let's get the vehicles as fun as we can, as fast as we can. And then once they're at a point where everyone is happy with the way they work and we're all enjoying them, then we can start expanding on those additional layers into the system. And that's when we'll start adding stuff like the damage to vehicles, vehicle repair, durability, And that's not, but that's not exclusively a vehicle feature. Like before we add any kind of vehicle weather damage, we also need to expand the building system to support stuff like garage doors and those kinds of things. So it's going to be a process of introducing a whole new pipeline of functionality into the game. And that's a bit further down the line of our priorities because we want to have some time for everyone to be playing with the vehicles as they are, and tweaking their functionality in terms of how they're used uh, first. And then once we have a couple months of that feedback, and a couple months of us tweaking and polishing based on that feedback, then we'll start development on that pipeline. The next system that will be added into the game will be the farming system, and then soon after that, the power system, like the power grids and generators and wiring and all that stuff. As those, like just like vehicles, as I explained, the first step of vehicles is to get play testing and feedback, and then we'll add more functionality. Now we're at the point where we've had enough play testing and feedback on the building system to have a pretty good idea of what people like, what people don't like, and now we're ready to start adding some additional functionality to that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, for answering this. I'm just following on other questions. So, yes, that was from Riddle Dad. Thanks, Riddle, for being active and yeah, throwing a bunch of questions. So it sounds like a vehicle, without a vehicle, we won't be able to use
right there on your screen. You just saw a Caripen drive past. Sorry for interrupting. If you jump back like 10 seconds, you'll see the other vehicle that I was mentioning. It was Karkanda, sorry. The Karkanda does drive past.
Was it here?
I think so. I think it's around here.
Should be here.
It was a white classic Karkanda that crossed paths with this vehicle.
Yeah.
There it is. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a good example of the size differences. You can see that the Karkanda just absolutely dwarfs the Caripen. And as a reference for scale, which you can't really see here, a human is about the height of the Caripen's wheels, which means the Karkanda's wheels are about 3.5 to 4 meters tall. That thing is really massive.
Jesus. Okay. So
sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, that's a good teaser for the guys as well to see how it looks like. Yeah, and talking about more question, the selling price. Yeah, I hinted in Landlord's channel that we start with 89 USDT value per classic Caripen, and the prices will be higher for epic and of course legendary. I don't see anything. Runtimes. Shall we discuss about the runtime? Because again, I seen a group of questions. So how long you will be able to explore the land with a fully charged vehicle? And then related question was, how long does it take, to get from one side of the land to another one? So probably we can answer those questions in 2 steps. So
I think it's also there's a good moment to differentiate between the 3D in-game runtime exploration and usage of the vehicles versus their MCC, because I believe in the MCC we do mention a stat of runtime. However, that is not related to driving time of the actual vehicle in game. In terms of how long it will take to cross a single land plot in the 3D game, this is something that obviously will change with time and play testing and feedback. But the Caripen, which is a fairly fast vehicle, and we're expecting it to be able to traverse a land in around 5 minutes or so. Obviously, it depends a lot on your land's makeup, like going up and down mountains and craters and stuff like that will make it harder to traverse. If the land in the current demo that we're using, most people know there's a fairly flattish area on the southern side of the land that runs from one end to the other. So if you're running across that flats, then about 4 to 5 minutes is quite reasonable. If you're running the other way, though, north to south on the land, you have to cross a fairly massive mountain and stuff like that, in which case it really varies depending on what route you pick.
Okay.
So that's and in terms of power, of like how long the vehicle would be able to traverse the 3D land on a full charge, our estimate is you should probably be able to circumnavigate the land at least twice on one full charge. So the idea isn't that you need to be running to recharge it all the time, especially specifically with the Terrapin, as it range and speed are both some of its strong suits. But as I said, this obviously is something that will be balanced based on player feedback, and I'm sure it will change many times before we find the exact numbers.
Yeah, so shall we mention then those runtimes? What we plan to release in MCC? Like this fully charged vehicle will be capable to explore classic one for 3 hours, while epic goes for 6 hours, and then legendary goes for 24 hours. And there's a question actually, is there a difference like if I traverse the land at full speed, or if I travel with Caripen on exploration mission and actually I'm scanning the land? So I assume on the second we should be a bit slower, or is it
Yeah, of course. That estimate was like full speed, just zooming through the land. You wouldn't really have enough time to be able to scan anything or collect any useful data at that kind of speed. And also if you're exploring the land, then moving in a straight line from one side to the other probably isn't a very efficient way of doing it. You should more be like seeing the data that you're getting from the scans and trying to find ore veins and stuff like that. So you wouldn't be going just in straight lines or stuff like that. You'd be much more following the surface and the scan data to try and find different resources and stuff. However, an important thing to note, the very first version of the Terrapin in the 3D game will not have all of its scanning functional. At the moment, it will be focusing just on the driving physics and stuff like that. And then we'll be integrating the scanning a bit later on down the line.
Yeah.
Because as I said, the first stage is let's get driving fun. So we need feedback on the driving systems, the mechanics of it, all of that. And then we'll be adding more of the unique features to the vehicles, as we're doing with the building system and using power and farming and stuff now.
So there's a question: how do we see the recharge? So recharge, I see the main energy source we are using is electricity in there. So charging is about the electricity.
Yeah, the Terrapin runs on electricity, but that's not exclusive. So different vehicles run on different things. However, the Terrapin runs on batteries and electricity. So you will need to recharge its batteries but unlike modern electric cars, you can actually physically remove and put in batteries. It runs on the same universal battery cell that most of the machines currently in the game do. So you're able to remove the empty batteries and put in fully charged batteries quite easily. So you don't need to just leave it there charging for an hour without being able to use it. You can manually swap out the batteries. Or if you want an even longer range mission and are willing to sacrifice some of your storage capacity, you could fill your storage with full batteries, giving you twice the range, for example. But then you are dramatically sacrificing what you can carry with you. But if your only objective is to map the land, then that's a fairly efficient way to go about it.
Okay. Fuzzy, so runtime is in real hours. So yeah, so that's answering your question whether we're counting real hours or in game hours. So yeah. Good. Anything else you would like to share? I think we answered most of the questions. Does the vehicle randomly select the land plot we own and start mining? No, the idea is that you have to assign the certain asset, which has to be sort of mined or set on the mission, and that is sort of the idea. It shouldn't be randomly randomly selecting land plot to start the mining.
Yeah. Players would select what they want to mine on the lands, and then first they'll have to explore the lands to see what are the primary resources available, and then they can decide which ones to focus on extracting.
Yeah. Good. Anything else to add, Nick? Yeah, vehicles, they won't be immortal. The pricing, to real size of land again, is it 13 by 13, 38 by 38 kilometers? No.
As I've mentioned, the final size of the in-game land still depends on how many different technical barriers we can overcome. So I don't have a comment on that yet. The current size of the in-game land, I believe, is 16 by 16 kilometers.
Yeah, 16 by 16.
Yeah. So, but that is not representative of what final size will be. As I said, it's just a matter of how far we can push it. I think it's unlikely that we get to the full 40 by 40 kilometers, just because that means there's so much data that we need to be saving and transmitting for each land that it brings up technical issues. But the point is we're trying to see how far we can push that. And there's lots of little things. For example, we'll be upgraded to Unreal Engine 5 over the next couple months, and that should give us a bit more buffer. We should be able to bit bigger lands then, and looking at different ways to optimize the surface data to get us even larger lands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. So yeah, for the classic vehicle, 3 hours runtime, it will mine automatically for 3 hours, but then after 3 hours, you will need to interact again. So if that is too frequent for you, you can go for another type, maybe epic, or maybe you can go for legendary. So yeah, I believe we answered most of the questions, guys. If you have anything, you can always find us on Discord, key community channels in there. So yeah, thanks Nick for giving this precise descriptions of how these vehicles work and how they will operate. So I'm really anxious, to start actually to get my first one as well, to drive around and see how that sort of feeling, not just running around Mars, but as well sort of exploring in the vehicles. And maybe we'll be able to add some radio stations. There were some suggestions during last music AMA. So yeah.
That would be awesome, actually.
Yeah, so keep tuned. Vehicle sale will start in 24 hours. We are leaking the last details on the landing page. We have to make it clear for you. Some of the questions you raised, they will help as well. So stay tuned. See you soon, guys.
All right. Cheers, guys. Thanks for joining so much. Speak to you guys soon.
Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.